This is Ken Pyle, and we're here talking about automated vehicles. We're with Bryant Walker Smith, who is a reformed transportation engineer, now an attorney, but it gives you a lot of credibility because you've actually designed roads. You've been very involved in the nuts and bolts of how we've got here in terms of a transportation system, and you know the legal aspects of it, and now we're talking about automated vehicles. Why don't you give the analogy that you gave in your speech a few minutes ago about broadband and what it looked like 20 years ago?
Sure. So the caution is any analogy is only useful to a point. But one way of looking at this is to say, well, how big of a change is coming? And if we look back to, say, 1994, when you had a 14.4 baud modem, and thinking, well, what's coming in the next 10 years? How might I, as a municipality, prepare for a future of the internet? It's not just laying more phone lines, thinking about, well, what would broadband access actually mean? Is it led by municipalities? Is it led more broadly by technological change and business models that are largely at the national level? Is it dependent on a few pilot projects to spark interest, to get communities competing? Is that sufficient to serve the majority of people? And all of these things we've seen play out surprisingly and imperfectly with broadband, and even then into wireless over the last several decades. And you can look forward to automation as a similar set of local and national tensions and developments and opportunities.
Well, and it's interesting because clearly a lot of these municipalities have their own public transportation systems, and they're used to doing that. But then there's also just the aspect of kind of facilitating for private entities as well. And it seems like there's some kind of crossover point there.
Mm-hmm. So at a broad national level, a local community is not going to force a major automaker to introduce a technology before they are ready, before they can. But communities can prepare for those levels of automation, and they can make the economic case to their residents in terms of transportation costs, parking costs, taxi cab regulations, all the things that could make transportation services that are automated more viable. And then at the community level, there are ways, more infrastructure dependent, more localized, of actually introducing automation into fleets, into neighborhoods, downtowns, business campuses, university campuses, retirement homes, amusement parks, all of these areas that could benefit in the near term from a more top-down approach to automation.
Well, and I think, and you pointed this out with the SAE levels, the multi-levels, there really are multiple skins to this onion, aren't there?
Absolutely. If we think just about motor vehicles, you can see on one hand increasing levels of automation where the driver is getting increasingly assisted by a computer, up to the point far in the future when the computer could drive from point A to point B while the human is asleep in the back. But that's more distant. What is perhaps more viable is an intermediate level of automation that, well, driverless is low speed, low mass, geographically restricted, perhaps infrastructure dependent, that serves communities or campuses or other areas where the economic case is there.
Well, and it's interesting because you mentioned that automated cars been 20 years off, since the 1950s, and now maybe it's 10 years off. But the thing is, when you're city planner or whatever, you have to plan for 20, 25 years off, right? So that must be a huge challenge for the planner because it looks like a lot of this is getting real, but it could have big time impacts in terms of, how many parking spaces do you create and that sort of thing.
Oh, absolutely, and those decisions in turn can impact the business cases and use cases for automation. In some ways it is exchanging one set of imaginary numbers for another set of imaginary numbers and really hoping that that you get it right, or at least you don't get it wrong in the really significant ways. At least asking the questions is a really good first step. So rather than assuming that VMT trends will continue, rather than
VMT,
vehicle miles traveled, okay. So that the traditional measure of vehicle, but essentially single passenger auto use is the number of miles traveled on the road. And you can look historically and project into the future, and that may have limited use as we talk about different assumptions for demand, different assumptions for capacity on systems, different land use patterns resulting from automation, different financial pictures for toll projects or others based both on changes in demand and capacity that are automation driven. At least approaching these in a thoughtful way means that, well, the answer might not be right. It will at least be better positioned to address these changes.
Well, fortunately, we have people like you asking these questions, and it seems like an imperative for people like the people who are at this conference, municipal planners and so forth, to really get their heads around this and start thinking.
Oh, it's exciting, and to see the level of expertise in that room today with planners and the whole week with a variety of transportation and other policy professionals is wonderful.
Well, Bryant, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.